And welcome back. Let's go ahead and take a look at comparing the Math.random and the random class. And the reason I want to point this out is because, of course, there are some advantages and disadvantages. And we have talked a little bit about this. But first, let's just go ahead and have a couple examples for us to look at. So, for example, if we want to have a random number using Math.random, so let's just go ahead and say like int random, and we'll set it equal to Math.random. And if we want to restrict that number, remember we're going to go ahead and have to pass in some values here for it to go ahead and be able to do it. Because remember, Math.random needs a double for it to kind of operate with. So if we're here looking at between 1 and 100, let's just go ahead and first off start by multiplying this by 100, because remember, by default, Math.random is going to work between 0 and 1. So if I say times 100, that will of course change it to that new range. But I also want to make sure I do plus 1, because otherwise what's going to end up happening is that this would still include that 0. So now we still have this error to deal with, and that's because I created an integer here. Now that is of course one thing to keep in mind when we're working with Math.random is that we have integers here. So I actually have to do a typecast of this value so that way I can know that it's going to convert into the appropriate type that I want it to be in. So let's go ahead and just make sure we include that typecast here. So we're just going to encapsulate this as an integer. And so now we should, of course, be able to get this. Now, I do want to make sure that because I am actually doing this times 100 plus 1, that I put that in parentheses as well, because otherwise it's going to simply just typecast this value right here. So I want to make sure it includes that whole thing. And now if I go ahead and just do a quick system.out.println of random, we should see a value that we can use. So let's just go ahead and run this one real quick. And you can see we get the value 31. So there's our random number. Perfect. Now, what if we wanted to use the random class? Well, remember with the random class, we of course have to create a random object, which I've already done up here. So random rng equals new random. So I'm going to create a new int. Let's call this one random num. And I'm going to, in this case, call rng.nextInt. Now, remember with this one, we kind of have an advantage that we don't have to typecast because the random class has an integer parameter for us to use. However, we of course still need to make sure that we have that restriction, that bound that we want to operate in. So if I want to bind this, I'm going to have to make this very similar to what I have up here. And so let's go ahead and put our bind in here. So let's just say 100. And of course we want to shift this so it's not starting at 0. We want this to start at 1. So again, we're going to do plus 1. And I'm going to again add a system.out.println. And let's just call random num. Now if I run this, I got of course two different numbers. We got 48 and 69. I run it again, 16, 96. We can run one more time. 72, 30. Perfect. So these, of course, are functioning the exact same way. Now, why might I use one over the other? Well, the random class, of course, is a whole class that we can pull much more methods for, right? We're not restricted to the double by default that we are using with the Math.random. Now, Math.random does have some advantages because it's pretty quick. Because we can just simply, hey, just Math.random, and we can generate that double and do all the work with it. We don't actually have to create an object that then has to handle whatever we want it to do. However, there are, of course, much more advantages to using random, such as if you start getting to things like multi-threading, where Math.random doesn't necessarily handle those as well, whereas if you use the random class. However, for our purposes, either one of these is correct. It's just more a matter of preference right now at the stage you're at with programming, which one you want to use. Now, to go back to our discussion about classes, when we previously introduced Math.random, this was a great thing for us to introduce because you'll notice that it introduces to the idea of we have this class structure, we have a name, and then of course we have a no-arg parameter for that constructor. And now, of course, we're taking a deeper look at classes, and you notice with here we have a class called Math.random, but remember, we didn't have to create a math object. And this is something that we're going to start seeing if we make static methods like this, where we can have some of these things that just exist where we don't necessarily have to have like a object dot and then whatever name we want to use. So these are, of course, the things is a great introduction for some of the things we're going to be looking at here in this chapter. But again, just a quick comparison for you to see the differences between the two of these and just some of the other nuances that you might have to navigate.